Yo, what's going on guys, Arekkz here, welcome back to another Division video, and in this video I want to give you guys an in-depth look at the brand new loadout system. The PTS for patch 1.6.1 has just gone live, so for those of you guys that are on PC, you can jump in right now and test it out. However, for those of you that are on console, I thought I would try and do this video so that you can see exactly what you can and cannot do with this new system. So if you do enjoy this, you do find it helpful, then a like would be super appreciated. If you have any questions with regards to loadouts, then drop them in the comments down below and I will do my best to answer them. I did, however, before making this video, put out a question on Twitter to ask you guys if you had any loadout related questions, so I will try and answer as many of those in this video as possible. But the first thing you want to do is you want to go and open up your menu, you go into your inventory and you'll see at the very top you have a loadouts tab. However, before that, if we go back to the overview, you can of course see this is the build I currently have. I have removed all of my gear mods so that we can build a loadout together. You can actually see the end-to-end process. But you will notice in the right hand side over here, underneath the electronics attribute, is a new label that says loadout unsaved. So this particular loadout I'm wearing right now has not been saved. So of course it means that if I do any swapping, I won't be able to just jump back to it instantly. But if we then go over to the loadouts tab, you can see there are 6 slots in total. This is the maximum, it doesn't scroll down, so once you've got 6, then you are locked at that. It's not a bad number, given that most people might jump between, 4 or 5 sets, but if you do have a plethora of gear sets that you are happy with, then of course there might be a situation where 6 isn't quite enough, but for the time being, this is a good starter. So I've got this one here temporarily saved, but we're going to start completely fresh. So if you go down to the free slot, you can then see the option to save your loadout. If you press that, then exactly what you're wearing right now will appear in this section. You can of course see my weapons, my Urban MDR, my LVOAC, and my 93R. All of them have the associated weapon mods in them. Plus I have my gear over here without mods because of course that is how I made the loadout. Also worth noting that down below it also saved my skills. So I have Booster Shot, I have Recovery Link, and I of course have my Dragon Breath mod turret. It also saves your mods, so this isn't just the base version of the skills, it is the version with whatever mod you have selected. And then to the right of that, it also has your talent saved, so obviously when you're building an entire build, it doesn't just revolve around the gear and the weapons, it also revolves around the mods, the gear mods, the skills, and the attributes. So this will perfectly encapsulate your entire build, so that way when you do want to swap between it, you don't have to think, alright, I've changed my gear, but let me quickly shuffle around my talents, or let me shuffle around my skills. You can save exactly the way you want to play with one particular build, and then jump between it on the fly. So what we'll do now is we'll go back to the overview tab and we will quickly put some mods into the gear. This way we can of course test how the loadout system will shuffle them between different sets. Also worth noting that if a mod is in a pre-existing loadout, you'll have this little link icon here to show that it is being used by a loadout. So that is what this one looks like right now. So if I then go back to the loadouts tab, I can go down below and I can save this in my loadout slot. You can of course see it now respects the gear mods I had. If I then go back to the one that I made just a moment ago and I go to the Bravo one which has no mods in at all, if I press space to equip that and go back to my overview tab, you can of course see it's removed all of my mods. But of course conversely, if I go back to the Charlie one, equip that, then go back to the overview tab, my mods are back in. So that in itself is pretty quick. However, this has all been done within the same loadout. I'm actually going to go back to my trial one for a second because this is the way that I actually spec'd my set before I started removing things, so I'll keep that for the time being. You can of course go down below and you can overwrite or you can delete your loadouts if you don't like them. There is also an option to rename them, however, you don't have the option to custom name them. You have to choose from a selection of items, so you have Assault, Demolition, DPS, Electronics, Incursion, Marksman, Medic, Point Man, PvE, PvP, Short Range, Long Range, Rusher, Solo, Stamina, Support, Tank, and Trial. So most of those will probably encapsulate the way you want to do it. Of course, it would be quite nice to be able to name them yourself, but at least for the most part, you can of course group them into things like PvP, PvE, long range for snipers, short range for SMGs, stuff like that, so there should at least be a way for you to discern between your different sets. Now, I'm going to delete this one for the time being. What I'm going to do is we're going to go back and jump to the overview tab and completely change the loadout. So this is a Firecrest setup for the time being. If I then go back and equip my Predator's Mark gear, you'll of course notice again, now that I've changed my gear, it still lists the loadout as unsaved, but if I go back to the loadouts tab, I then go down below and I then save this one. I'm actually going to go and name this one, I don't know, let's call it Assault for the time being. If you go back to the overview tab, you'll now see it lists the loadout as Assault. So if I then jump back to this one and equip that, of course the overview says I'm wearing my trial loadout. So again, very clear on exactly what you're wearing. One thing I do want to test out, which should answer a question from some of you guys, is I want to see if it will actually take a mod from one set and drag it into another one. So let's go and take the knee pads for example. This currently has a prototype firearms mod on with plus 2,342 health. So this one specifically, I'm going to put into my Predator's Mark knee pads. So if I take this off for the time being, and I then go over to my loadouts, equip this one, yep, that's fine, and I then go back to the knee pads here and equip that very same mod. You can of course tell this is the one because it has the link icon stating that it belongs in another loadout. If I equip this one here and then go back to my loadouts tab and overwrite this with the new changes, you can now see that the knee pads themselves do have the exact same mod that is in the trial gear set. So if I go back over here to my overview tab, you can then see that it is indeed there. But if I go back and equip the trial gear set, you can actually see it has indeed swapped it. So yes, the answer is it will pass gear mods and weapon mods between different loadouts. Effectively, whatever you have saved on your build at the time you create the loadout, provided it has access to those items, it will then draw from them whether it needs to take them out of other gear set pieces, whether it needs to just grab them from your spare inventory. However it does it, it will assemble it for you. It is worth noting there is a very slight cooldown between being able to swap. You'll notice that if I go and swap to Assault, for about 2 or 3 seconds the equip button is grayed out. So I can't just go and swap between them like this. You'll notice that there is a section where I can't actually double click. So I do have to wait a couple of seconds. It's not massive, but of course that's to slow down the ability to kind of, jump between them. Now, one of the other questions that came from you guys is, do the items need to be in your own personal inventory or can they come from the stash? So the easiest way to test that out is to go here and we're going to go and put some of my Predator's Mark pieces back into my stash. So I'll just for the time being take the mask. So if I go send to stash, it'll actually come up with a pop-up saying this item is part of a loadout. If you stash this item, your loadout will be incomplete until you return it to your inventory. So if I go and send that to stash, and let's go and send the backpack as well temporarily. If I then go back out of there and go into my inventory, you will see that my loadout currently lists a loadout with 2 gaps. You can of course see the icon up there to denote the fact that it is in my stash. So if I then go and try and equip this one, it will then inform me that part of this loadout is in my stash, and it will say, do you want to equip the remaining items in this loadout? So you can still equip a incomplete loadout, but of course in that situation where it didn't have the backpack nor did it have the mask, it of course couldn't complete the entire loadout. So the loadout function itself does still work if some of the items are in your stash, but it won't allow you to just draw them from there, which is fair enough. Of course it makes sense, you can't just suddenly be grabbing items from your stash in the middle of combat, so that does still apply. Now another question from one of you guys is, can these be used in combat? Now when you first boot up the game, the tooltip will tell you that these cannot be used in combat, but since it's a new edition and since it's a PTS, it's definitely worth testing out. So for the purposes of that, currently wearing my Firecrest set, if I go and get myself into combat without actually trying to sort of kill them and finish out the fight, I'm going to go and hide behind here, currently in combat, go into my inventory, go to my loadouts and attempt to change it, but you'll see it says I'm currently in combat. You cannot equip a loadout when in combat. Please change items individually. So if I go and try and throw on my trial set, I of course can't quite do that. I currently have my assault set active, and no matter how much I click, no matter how much I double press, in fact there's not even an option to select it, so I simply cannot change it, which is a good thing to note because one of the other questions I did see quite a lot, actually this popped up on Reddit and in some of my YouTube comments, was could you go and say use something like Predator's Mark, apply a bleed to someone, swap to something like Firecrest and then get the additional damage boost from your second gear set? So the answer to that is no. When you're in combat, you can't swap the sets, no matter how much you like. You can, of course, as you would normally, go into your inventory and try and juggle items individually, but you definitely can't go to your loadouts and you cannot swap them from there. It's also worth mentioning that you can't change loadouts if you have a skill on cooldown, so to better illustrate that, we're going to go back to the loadouts tab. We have the assault set on currently. What I'm going to do is back out from there and go and change my abilities, something I didn't actually do before. I'm going to throw on some completely random skills, this doesn't matter for the time being, just to give you a better illustration of exactly what the loadouts can do, the fact they can swap absolutely everything. So we'll throw on some completely random talents as well, and then return to the inventory for a second, go back to loadouts, and we'll overwrite the assault set. So it now looks something like this, so we now have some completely different skills. We of course have a support station, we have a sticky bomb, and we have a load of random talents over here. So, jumping over to the trial set, this is of course my Firecrest set. If we back out from there and use my turret, the second it comes back, if we drop this down here, you can of course see that if I go into my inventory and I go to my loadouts, it will then give me another prompt here saying skill cooldown. You cannot equip a loadout when skills are in cooldown. And that doesn't just mean when they are out and active. If I cancel the turret and I blow it up, and I then have to wait for it to cool down. You can of course see right now it's about halfway through the cooldown. If I jump back into my inventory again, go over to loadouts, it still tells me that while the skill is in cooldown, I cannot change. Do of course bear in mind that doesn't apply to signature skills, given that they do have a much more drastic cooldown. It is just for regular skills, so your Q and E's typically. But while they're on cooldown, you cannot switch. But the second it's completed, as you can see there, it just finished. I can then go back to my inventory, go to my loadouts, jump to my new setup, and of course you can see I have my completely different skills. So again, swaps absolutely everything, but that kind of ties into the whole sort of combat thing. So you can't swap loadouts if you're in combat and if you have skills on cooldown. And the last question I want to answer from one of you guys is, do loadouts persist across characters? And the answer to that is no. Since obviously different characters hold different items and they have access to different stuff, they have their own personal inventories, the loadouts are a personal character decision or a personal character action. So you'll actually have to bind these accordingly. Typically, that's not going to be a problem for most of you, since you will probably have different loadouts for your different characters. Maybe you have a PvP character, PvE character, something like that. But either way, if you go to a second character, your loadouts are completely fresh, so you'll need to bind them accordingly. Obviously, it goes without saying, you could create an identical loadout for two characters, and then simply, when you're finished with it, put the items in the stash and transfer them between. But for seamless swapping, no, you can't just jump loadouts between characters. So that is pretty much it. That was a very quick look at the loadouts, how they work. Again, if you guys have any additional questions, if there's anything I didn't cover, let me know. I'll try and answer them in the comments, but for the time being, that is how they work. So provided everything goes to plan and they don't suddenly discover some glaring bugs with them, then when 1.6.1 hits, then we'll of course all get access to loadouts. Anyway, thank you for watching, take it easy, catch you next time, peace out.